A Valentine's Day. The Whispered Heart. It was supposed to be the perfect Valentine's Day. Amelia had been planning for weeks. The perfect dinner, the perfect dress, the perfect surprise for the love of her life, Josh. She had scoured Pinterest for ideas, read blogs, and even scouted out a secluded cabin in the woods for a romantic getaway. She wanted everything to be flawless. Their relationship had been a whirlwind, something that felt like a fairy tale from the start. He was everything she had ever dreamed of, charming, attentive, and always ready with a smile. They'd been dating for almost 2 years, and she was certain he was the one. But now, the atmosphere was different. The whole week leading up to Valentine's Day, she felt a gnawing sensation in the back of her mind, like something wasn't right. It was subtle at first, just a sense that things weren't as perfect as they seemed, but on the morning of Valentine's Day, it was undeniable. She woke up to a text from Josh which at first made her smile. "Happy Valentine's Day, babe. I can wait to see you tonight. I've got something special planned for us. Trust me, it's going to be amazing." But there was something off about the message. The words felt stiff, robotic. Amelia couldn't explain it, but it didn't feel like him. She shrugged it off as stress or perhaps an early morning text that was sent in a rush. Josh had always been a little unpredictable with his plans, often surprising her with spontaneous romantic gestures, but this time it felt more calculated. She hoped it was just the pre-Valentine's excitement messing with her head. By evening, they were en route to the cabin, a quaint little cottage nestled deep in the woods, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. Yes, the drive was smooth, but the air outside felt heavier than usual, colder, despite the fact that it was relatively mild for February. When they arrived, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the only light came from the flickering shadows of the woods and the faint glow of the cabin's windows. It was idyllic, yet something about the place seemed too quiet. It wasn't just the absence of other people. It was the silence itself. Even the wind had hushed. Josh stepped out of the car first, his face illuminated by the headlights. He had a grin plastered across his face, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Amelia felt a flicker of discomfort, but she brushed it off, trying to focus on the romantic evening ahead. The cabin was charming, rustic, with wood-paneled walls and a roaring fireplace in the living room. Josh had set up candles everywhere, and soft music played from an unseen source. She marveled at the effort he'd put into this. He really had thought of everything. "So, what's the surprise?" she asked, slipping out of her coat. Josh looked at her, his smile widening. "You'll see. Just relax. I promise. It'll be perfect." Amelia's stomach fluttered with excitement and nerves. Josh wasn't the type to make big promises without following through, so she trusted him. But as the evening wore on, she started to feel increasingly uneasy. After they'd had dinner, a candlelit meal Josh had cooked himself, he led her upstairs to the bedroom. The air in the cabin had grown colder, the silence even thicker. As she stepped into the room, something caught her eye. There, on the nightstand, was a small box wrapped in red paper. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. Was this the big surprise? "I'll be right back," Josh said, his voice odd. As he disappeared down the hallway toward the bathroom, Amelia's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the box. The paper crinkled under her touch, the weight of it unfamiliar. She peeled it back carefully, her heart racing with anticipation. Inside was a card. The front read, in elegant script, "To my one true love, Amelia." Her breath hitched. The handwriting was off. It wasn't Josh's. It was too precise, almost unnatural. The letter seemed to curve too sharply, the lines too perfect, but she ignored the strange sensation that washed over her and opened the card. "I'm sorry, Amelia, you'll never be able to leave me. You're mine now, forever." A cold shiver ran down her spine. She froze, staring at the words. Her heart pounded in her chest and the blood drained from her face. "Josh?" she called out, her voice trembling. "What is this?" There was no answer. Panicked, she stood and moved toward the door, but it slammed shut on its own, the sound echoing in the empty house. Amelia's breath came in shallow gasps. Something was very wrong. "Josh!" she shouted again, this time with more urgency, but her voice didn't carry. It was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the cabin. Suddenly, she heard it, A faint, scraping sound, like nails on a chalkboard, followed by a low, guttural whisper. "You're mine, Amelia. You will never leave." She spun around, her pulse racing. The room was empty. No one was there. But the voice? It felt as though it was coming from every corner of the room. A whisper that seemed to slither inside her head. Terror gripped her heart. Amelia backed away from the walls, her hands trembling as she reached for the door handle. The air was suffocating, thick with the scent of decay. She tried to turn the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Joshua!" she screamed now, frantic, as she pounded on the door, her voice cracked with fear. And then, just as suddenly as it started, everything went silent. The whisper stopped, the coldness disappeared, the door creaked open. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled out into the hallway, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She sprinted down the stairs, her feet barely touching the steps as she rushed to the front door. It was locked, but she didn't hesitate. She grabbed a nearby vase and smashed it against the doorknob, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. The door flew open and she ran out into the night, not caring where she was going, only that she needed to escape. She ran through the woods, the darkness pressing in around her, the eerie stillness of the night broken only by the sound of her footsteps and her ragged breaths. Every rustle of leaves made her freeze. Every snap of a twig felt like an ominous warning. But she couldn't stop, she couldn't slow down. After what felt like hours, she stumbled onto a deserted road, breathless, her legs aching. She looked around. No sign of Josh, no sign of the cabin. But then, she heard it again, that whisper. "You can't escape, Amelia, you belong to me now." It came from the woods behind her, a cold, familiar voice. But this time, it wasn't Josh's voice. She turned around, and there, standing at the edge of the trees, was a figure, tall, looming, with pale skin and hollow eyes, its mouth stretched into a twisted grin that looked more like a snarl. Amelia froze in terror, unable to move, unable to scream. The figure stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. "You're mine now." The voice, the presence, was suffocating. Amelia's legs finally gave way and she collapsed onto the road, her mind racing for any way out. But the figure was getting closer, its shadow stretching across the ground, swallowing everything in its path. Suddenly, she felt a hand on her shoulder, a cold, clammy hand. She spun around, expecting to see the figure, but instead it was Josh. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking, like he wasn't really there. "What's happening?" she gasped. "What's going on?" Josh didn't respond. Instead, he simply smiled, his lips curving into a twisted, unnatural grin. "You're mine now, Amelia. You will never leave." And then everything went dark. "I hope this sets the spooky tone you're looking for. Let me know if you'd like me to keep going or explore other elements in the story," the whispered heart. Amelia awoke with a start. She was lying on the cold, hard ground, her head throbbing, her vision blurry. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The blackness of the night had enveloped her. But there was something wrong with the air. It felt oppressive, too still, too quiet. She tried to sit up, but her body felt like it was made of lead, as though it had been drained of all energy. Her fingers barely grazed the rough pavement beneath her. Her breathing came in shallow, panicked gasps, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't seem to focus. Where was Josh? Where was the figure? What happened to me? Then the whisper came again, soft, slithering, from behind her. "You didn't think you could escape, did you, Amelia?" The voice was a sickening mix of Josh's tone and something darker, something ancient. It wrapped itself around her, sinking into her mind like poison. She spun around, desperate to find the source, but the road was empty. No figure, no Josh, just the emptiness of the woods and the oppressive silence. Yet she felt something watching her, felt eyes on her, though there was no one to be seen. "It's like I was waiting for him. It's like you might have tempted me too." Amelia's heart thundered in her chest as she slowly rose to her feet. Her legs were wobbly, weak, as though they weren't entirely her own. Every step felt unnatural, like she was moving through someone else's body. The shadows around her stretched impossibly long, as if they were reaching toward her. She squinted into the dark, but the woods were now a vast expanse of blackness, the trees towering like silent, menacing sentinels. The night seemed to press in on her from all sides, and then the wind picked up. It was cold, bitter, and sharp, like it was carrying something malicious. Emilia's throat tightened. She stumbled forward, the feeling of being watched growing more intense until it felt like the very woods themselves were alive, breathing, as if they were waiting. The whispering returned, louder now, curling around her every thought. He's waiting for you. He's always been waiting for you. Amelia froze, her blood running cold. The voice was unmistakable now. It was Josh's voice, but it was also not Josh. It was deeper, hollow. Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her through the trees. She didn't know where she was going. She just had to get away, had to escape. But it felt like the forest was drawing her in, guiding her, as if it knew exactly where she needed to go. She couldn't fight it. She couldn't resist. The path grew narrower, the trees closing in, until there was only one direction left to go, a clearing up ahead. And in that clearing, she saw a faint light, a soft glow that flickered like a candle in the dark. It beckoned her, like a lighthouse in the midst of a storm. As she approached, her heart began to race. The light wasn't a normal light. It wasn't warm or comforting. It was cold. It flickered unnaturally, casting long, twisted shadows on the ground, shapes that didn't seem to belong to the trees around them. Emilia stepped forward cautiously. The whisper was louder now, almost deafening. He's waiting, Amelia. He's always been waiting. Her feet moved on their own again, carried by some force beyond her control. She stepped into the clearing, and there, standing in the center, was the figure again. The one from earlier. Its pale, ashen skin glowed unnaturally in the dim light. Its eyes black as night. Its smile grotesque. It was the waiting. It wasn't Josh. It wasn't human. It was something else entirely. Something ancient. Something dark. Amelia's breath caught in her throat as she realized with horror that this thing, whatever it was, had been following her. She had been lured here. And then, as if responding to her panic, it spoke. "Welcome, Amelia." Its voice wasn't just a whisper now, it was a chorus, a cacophony of voices, layered and overlapping. It was everywhere. In the trees, in the ground, in her mind. "We've been waiting for you." Amelia backed away, her mind racing. She tried to scream, but her voice was swallowed by the oppressive air around her. She was trapped. She could feel the earth beneath her, but it felt wrong. Like it wasn't the earth at all. It felt like something else. Then, through the crowding darkness, a shape emerged. It was Josh. Or at least, it looked like Josh. He stepped into the clearing, his body stiff, unnatural. His eyes were wide and blank, as if he wasn't really there. His skin was pale, his lips cracked into that same twisted grin. "Amelia," he said, his voice flat and empty. "It's time." Her knees gave way, and she fell to the ground, her body trembling uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at the figure, her mind reeling. She tried to speak, to plead, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was stare into Josh's hollow eyes. No, Josh. What is this? What's happening?" she managed to choke out, her voice barely above a whisper. Josh's lips twisted into something darker. "You were never meant to leave, Amelia. You were never meant to be free." The figure, the thing, stepped forward, closer, its cold breath washing over her, chilling her to the bone. The shadows around them grew longer, darker. They were alive. They were moving, twisting, stretching toward her. "He was never truly Josh," the voice echoed in her mind. "Josh was only a vessel, a lure. You were always meant to be mine." Amelia's pulse raced, as everything she thought she knew shattered. The man she loved, the man she had trusted, was never truly Josh. He had been the vessel, the puppet. A puppet for something far older, far darker. And now, that darkness was coming for her. The figure reached out with long, bony fingers, and just as it touched her skin, a terrible force surged through her body. Pain ripped through her veins, sharp and unbearable, like fire coursing through her blood. She screamed, but no sound came out. "You are mine," the voice whispered, "forever." The last thing she saw before everything went black was Josh's hollow smile. The end. Or is it? Amelia was never seen again. The cabin was found abandoned days later, the fire long gone out. The authorities found no trace of her, no sign of struggle, just an empty, eerie silence. The last messages on her phone were the ones from Josh, dated just hours before she disappeared. "It's going to be perfect, trust me." And the last one, sent just before the phone went silent, "You're mine now." Some say that on quiet nights, if you listen closely enough near that cabin, you can still hear the faint whispering. The whispers of someone who was never truly meant to leave. "You're mine, Amelia, forever."